Okay, good Friday morning, friends, and a wonderful Friday welcome to the Urban Ecology Center's Backyard Naturalist community. My name is Tim, and I will be the host this week as we look into a very common, a very ordinary weed. Some would call it flower, others would call it pollinator, herb, food, wish granter. The dandelion has many names. I'd be hard pressed to find someone who hasn't interacted with a dandelion at some point. And as a kid, as an adult, they're super recognizable, super friendly. They don't hurt you. They're almost asking to be touched and cuddled and rubbed. And whether you're pulling them or as my kids would do all the time, giving them as gifts, they make wonderful gifts. You can stick it behind your ear, bring it into your kitchen as a flower or food. I'm calling them its. I should be calling them kin. The omnipresent dandelion is just a fantastic plant, and it's everywhere. And it's not my job to get you to like or dislike the dandelion or to change your opinion, but hopefully by the end of this half hour, you have a deeper understanding of the plant as a beautiful survivor, as an adapter that has long interacted with humans and many other forms of life. So sit back, relax if you can, enjoy a warm beverage as we bask in the glow of our electronic devices and we bring you episode 26 of season 6 of The Backyard Naturalist, The Dandelion King. And thank you so much for being here. And an extra special thank you to those of you that are part of the subscriber community. We so appreciate your commitment to the program, whether you have an annual or a seasonal or a super subscription or just here hanging out. Thank you, and thanks to everyone for being here today. I will miss you after we sign off this morning, but we have another chance to hang out tomorrow as part of the Green Spaces Familiar Faces program, Weather Dependent, which is a monthly-ish adventure where we have asked local personalities to take us to their favorite green spaces. So far we've had some wonderful adventures, and that trend will likely, hopefully, continue tomorrow as Ken Gandalf Leinbach is the featured familiar face who will take us to his favorite green space, which is essentially his backyard that overlooks Pleasant Valley Park in River West. And unfortunately, Ken had a recent injury that is going to prevent him from leading a hike, but this means we're not going to cancel it. Ken is going to light a nice backyard fire, which was also previously featured on the Backyard Naturalist. And this means that participants will have the options to, because he recruited some friends who are also naturalists, you have the options to hang out at the fire with Ken as he regales you with stories about the land and whatever else you want to talk about, or his recruited friends will take you on a short hike to, there's a local and pretty rare giant beech grove near his house, which is really worth the visit. And for those that are feeling ambitious, there will be a longer hike along both sides of the river from Locust to Capitol. And if you decide not to go on either hikes, again, you can sit by the fire with Ken, or he can take you to his maple sap collecting operations and show you those. So should be a good time. And if you're interested, please visit the UEC website or contact me. And there is another great opportunity coming up in early April. This is really just hot off the presses as we finally dotted the T's and crossed the I's. We're going to lead an overnight trip to Buena Vista Wildlife Area up near Stevens Point, Wisconsin, to see one of the 7 wildlife wonders of Wisconsin, maybe even the country. It's the elusive and amazing Greater Prairie Chicken Lecking area. And this is going to be an overnight trip, leaving Milwaukee in a regular morning time, not an early time, on Wednesday, April 2nd. We'll stay overnight and then wake up overnight in a hotel and then wake up really early to hike out to the viewing blinds, which will allow us to watch the sun come up over the prairie lecking grounds, and you will see and hear the amazing spectacle of greater prairie chicken courtship. You do have to see and hear it to believe it, so something everyone should witness at least once in their lifetimes. Bucket list item for sure. So you can check with me for more information on that. And then finally, we're going to extend our boundaries a little further. Registration is now open for a UEC eco travel trip to the fantastic, amazing, wonderful rainforests of Costa Rica. We'll spend 10 days traveling around one of the greenest, most biodiverse, one of the happiest and healthiest countries in the world. It'll be a smaller group this time. We'd love for you to join us. And for more information, you can check out our website or contact me. I do have a little short promotional video for the trip comprised of photos from previous trips to Costa Rica. We're not visiting all of the same areas, but it'll give you an idea of what happens. And I think I can share this because it is our video. I don't have to worry about copyright laws. So I'll play this for you. Okay, from tropical splendor, we're going to head to the grass, whoops, right outside your door to discuss the magic and beauty and hardiness of the dandelion. And I will mention my go-to sources of information again for many episodes, including this one, which is the How Stuff Works website, the Stuff You Should Know podcast, and the Mental Floss website. All wonderful places to get lost in knowledge. So here we are with a very familiar dandelion. It probably doesn't invoke the awe that many of the creatures we'll see in Costa Rica do, like the howler monkeys and the sloths, but a fabulous species nonetheless, and for different reasons, amazing. At its base level, the dandelion is a plant. It's one of the many species of flowering plants that inhabit our planet. So, as a plant, it has its scientific name that Western science has bestowed upon it and has a lot of colloquial names, its own origins, its own interactions with other life forms. And they are part of so they're flowering plant dicot, in the bigger groupings of plants that and the largest group of plants that includes other plants that we've already featured on the backyard naturalist are the asterids. So this is a really large grouping of flowering plants, more than 80,000 species, or about half of all named flowering plants. So huge group that the list goes on of what's in here: dogwoods, tea, blueberries, cranberries, kiwis, sunflowers, parsley, ginseng, olives, potatoes, coffee, tobacco, sweet potatoes, and so many others. From this very large group, then, we travel into new territory on the Backyard Naturalist, which is the order Asterales. So, known for their composite flowers or florets. So, the flowers are clustered in the middle. Each of those little things, this is not one flower, it's a flower head. The flowers are the tiny things inside. A clustered group, what you call an inflorescence, and then the outer, what would normally be petals on a flower, are actually sepals that just kind of protect the inflorescence. And then from order, we move to family, and continuing with the aster name, you started with asterids to asterales, now asteraceae, very large family, 32,000 known species at least. They're named species, the second largest family of flowering plants after the orchids. So originally back in 1740, if you were a botanist, a Western botanist at that time, you'd call these the composites. And so there's a whole bunch of different names for this family: the asters, daisies, sunflowers, or composites. And as a group, their flower heads are consist of hundreds of those tiny florets enclosed by a whorl of bracts, which Again, not petals, but actually bracts. Then we move to genus, and the genus of the dandelion is Taraxacum, which is a very large genus. And even though we think of the dandelion as a specific species, the ones that invade our yards, a lot of people around the world would consider dandelions this genus. So there are quite a few species of dandelions, not the dandelion that we have. They're all native to Eurasia in the old world, and including our dandelion. And then from here, we do take it to species. So it's Taraxacum officinale, or the common dandelion. And Taraxacum has an Arabic root meaning. It means bitter herb, Taraxagag, and officinale, maybe my favorite meaning. It's a monastery storeroom. So together, the two names, the scientific names, mean or translate as a bitter herb in a monastery storeroom. Call it what you want. Colloquially, it's called the puffball, the monk's head. It's about a 30 million year old plant, but with a very long history of interactions with human beings. It's a relatively simple plant. The flowers, like many asters, are considered an inflorescence or a group of flowers. And the characteristic that we are most familiar with is that those flower heads turn into those round balls of silver tufted hoary fruits, sometimes called clocks or blow balls. But it's essentially a big ball of the plant's fruits that include the seed. And they're very hardy. They're quite tolerant of poor soils, tolerant of crowding, tolerant of drought, tolerant of concrete, tolerant of temperature extremes. And because of this hardiness, it has become established all over the world on every continent except Antarctica, of course. The plant itself consists of a taproot, which can grow very deep into the ground. And from this grows a rosette of basal leaves and hollow leafless stems with that beautiful purplish tint. And these stems grow to a height of about 8 inches, but they can range from 2, or a tiny dandelion, maybe up way far north, to as much as 28 inches. So you can have some big honking dandelions. And then out of each of those stems grows a single flower head. So the leaves are deeply lobed, and that is what gives them ultimately the common name that most of us give to this plant, the dandelion, and which is French for the teeth of the lion, dandelion. The flowers are food for a wide variety of insects, both in the old world and the new world, particularly the honeybee, which was also brought from the old world. But there's just a ton of nectar. You wouldn't think a ton of nectar nestle into those little flower heads. And then later, as you see the evolution from flower to fruit, you get a bunch of seeds that are important to birds. And really, because they go to flower very early in the year and are still in seed very late in the year, there's really only a short period of time when you don't potentially have dandelions. That means it can be a very reliable food source for wildlife. So yeah, a lot of non-natives are not good because there's not much of an interaction with the local wildlife, at least not in a positive way. And you can give some slack to dandelions because there is interaction with our native animals in somewhat of a beneficial way. So almost, but again, depending on where you live, they're up and about almost year round. And I think it's probably easy to look at that, or at least for me, you look at the yellow in the dandelion flower and kind of see it as just a massive yellow, like this monolithic yellow. But there is, you do see, because it's all yellow, maybe it's a little harder to pull apart as you do see in some other daisies or sunflowers. But you can see that the flowers are clustered in the middle, that inflorescence is clustered in the middle, and then surrounded by the yellow bracts. But it kind of looks like just one thing. Um, so the center part is where the pollination occurs. It's where all the nectar is. And um, yeah, moving on. So flowers that are open in the daytime, like that past slide, are they actually, as night comes and the light becomes less bright, they start to close, and in the evening, they're all tucked into bed. And this feature of the flowers opening in the daytime and closing at night gives it another one of its colloquial names, which is the shepherd's clock. It is thought to open and close daily to preserve pollen. It's one of the potential advantages. And you can look online for little time-lapse videos of this happening. It's kind of cool. Um, the movement of flowers, I was looking this up, is called nastic movement. Anytime a flower move, so I don't know if that would also, no, well, I guess a Venus flytrap, it's not the flower. Anyway, nastic movement is when the flowers are moving, and oftentimes you'll see that in sunflowers where the flower tracks the sun through the day. That's not the only type of nastic movement. There's the dandelions do this opening and closing daily, this with the circadian rhythm, and that's called nyctonasty or nighttime, which is a type of photonasty, that is movement of a plant that is influenced by the sun. So the flower heads open, close, and so if you visit your favorite dandelion patch at night, and if you can see them, the flowers should be all sleeping tight in their little protected beds. And speaking of clocks, many folks refer to that puffball seed head as a clock because it is said that if you want to know the time, you can either look at your watch or your phone, or if it's convenient, just blow on a puffball, and the time will be however many puffs of air it takes you to blow all the seeds off of the head. And I'm sure it's very accurate, just not sure what's going on between noon, when it would essentially take 12 puffs of air to blow all the seeds off, but just an hour later at 1 o'clock, it would only take one breath. Definitely worth investigating. So 3 puffs of air, 3 o'clock, 3.5 puffs, it's got to be 3:30, and I'm definitely gonna try that one out a little bit. Put that one right up there with the number of cows that are sleeping in a field is the percent chance of rain. Very, very probably used by most meteorologists. Each flower head consists of anywhere from 40 to over 100 of those tiny little yellow florets in the middle, and the the flowers then, like any other good flower, will eventually become fruits, and the fruits are called cypselae, and they range in color from olive green to olive brown to grayish to pale yellow, and they eventually become the white puffball. So the fruit are what form these beautiful silky papae. Pappus singular, papae plural. This is the characteristic white seed delivery system with those beautiful parachutes that are just perfectly engineered, just so pleasing to see, and tells you right away that this is a wind dispersed seed, whether that wind comes from a human breath or the actual wind. And that perfect little parachute not only allows it to become airborne, but the structure of the seed is phenomenally effective at keeping that seed aloft. It is a feat of natural engineering, and that parachute actually forms a vortex and can stay aloft for quite a long time. But if you're looking into all of this other stuff, like how how they can tell time, you might see in many different places that the typical pappus can travel up to 60 miles from the parent plant. For some reason, that is, well, 60 miles is 100 kilometers, so that's a pretty easy one to kind of glom onto. And you will see that in a lot of different places. And while it is theoretically possible, the chance of it happening, of one of those seeds going 60 miles, is extremely small. A 2003 study said that, or supported that, only 1 in 7,000 of these little papilla travel more than even a kilometer from the parent. So, that's just over a half mile, 6/10 of a mile. So 99.5% of all the seeds land within 30 feet of the parent plant. That does not take any of the magic away, in my opinion. It's still an amazing system of dispersal, but it's not as quite as far as we have imagined it should be or would be or want it to be. If a stray dandelion lands on the water, it's not doomed, and it's that very little delicate little parachute, which, by the way, when it is flying, when it is up in the air, let me go back. Um, there is a vortex that forms that keeps it aloft. So it's not just like the aerodynamics that would eventually bring it down. There is a vortex that encourages that seed physically to stay aloft. But then if it lands on water, it doesn't collapse. It doesn't just become soaked. It will float and maybe float over to the coastline or whatever. And if it does end up sinking or going under the surface of water, it forms an air bubble so that the structure of that seed does not collapse. And you can try this at home. You can see it with your own eyes as if you take a puffball and put it underwater. Those little tiny parachutes maintain their structure after you submerge them in water so that delicate system doesn't just collapse. Another adaptation that makes this little hardy plant so successful. So the pappus is omniphilic. It repels oil and water. So when they are submerged, they kind of close up and trap a tiny water droplet, which likely helps it survive wet conditions, even if it's in the air, if a raindrop or something like that. That air bubble that forms on top of the filaments will also help keep it in the air longer if it, like I said, gets wet in the air. So you can see the transition between flower to fruit from left to right here. And then another interesting adaptation that happens on the plant is that the first part of that, when the flower forms, those stems are quite erect, going very high in the air, saying, bees, come pollinate me. But then when it's on that third stage and it's collapsing, which is the dandelion form of a cocoon, because it's changing in that little protected area from flower to fruit, when it's in that third stage, it actually droops and comes kind of below the top of the surrounding area and the top of the plant, because that's when it's probably most vulnerable. And I mentioned that birds love to eat the seeds. And so if it was up during that transition, it would probably get predated a little more readily. So it kind of droops down, makes the transition, and then when that full seed head is ready for dispersal, then it comes right back up, goes right up back to the top of the plant, and it's ready for the wind to take it. And that's when some birds will still eat the seeds, but at least it has bought some time. So that's the basics of the biology anatomy. And I've mentioned how important it is for wildlife as a food source. And on another level, dandelions have a very long history with the human species as both a food, as an herb, as medicine. And the relationship goes back way earlier with human species that isn't recorded, at least not on paper. And they were well known to the Egyptians, to the Greeks, to the Romans, to the Chinese. But as far as recorded history, there were two Arabic physicians in the 10th and 11th century who wrote extensively about the properties. So I'm, not mentioning anything in North America because back then it is native to Eurasia, so it wasn't in North America. Um, so there's an Arab physician, Avicenna, who lived right around the year 1000 CE, the Common Era, and he, a well a prolific author, hundreds of books, and he also had a medical encyclopedia, the Canon, and in there he referenced dandelions using the same scientific name we use today. And he mentioned that dandelions can be used topically for abscess, for arthralgia, for you can use it in a deep wound, a bone wound, for dermatitis, for a headache, for purulent ear infections, and injury of the orbits. And again, so many cultures and people have looked into the benefits of the dandelion, probably the most famous, the one that's used most widely, is that it is a diuretic. It makes you pee. In fact, some of the European names for the dandelion reference this property of making you pee. So a modern French word for the dandelion is pissenlit or pissenlit, which literally means wet the bed, so, or wet in the bed. So you eat a dandelion at dinner, you might have a wet bed that night. In English, it has a folk name piss a bed, or in Luxembourgish, it's peace bloom or pea flower. And it's, primarily that high potassium content that makes it such a good diuretic. So if you need to pee, the dandelions are there for you. Um, in the 16th century, Sir William Langham, a British physician and a herbalist, wrote a book called, and I'm going to read the full title to you because why not? It is called The Garden of Health, containing the sundry, rare, and hidden virtues of all kinds of simples and plants, together with the manner of how they are used and applied in medicine for the health of man's body against diverse diseases and infirmities, most common against men, gathered by the long experience and industry of William Langham, practitioner of physic. And in this book, you could also call it the Garden of Health. There is even a recipe to use dandelions for baldness. It talks about how it can help cure toothaches, fever, depression. And then botanically, it brings up another important feature of the dandelion, which is super important from a gardener's perspective, in that dandelions release ethylene gas. So if you plant dandelions in your garden alongside vegetables and herbs, the ethylene from the dandelion will help ripen your fruiting plants like tomatoes. So ethylene gas is really important in some industries, particularly the pineapple industry. You can learn all about that if you join us on a trip to Costa Rica, but dandelions are actually good for the other things in your garden because of this ethylene property. So, in the 1630s, John Gerard noted that dandelions strengthen a weak stomach. And in modern times, it has been confirmed, and pretty much all of these other things have been confirmed, but it is confirmed that dandelions are high in inulin, which we know of as a prebiotic for gut health. So it's interesting that the dandelion is still studied in medicine today, and so many of these modern studies are pretty much confirming what humans have known for centuries or even millennia. They have more vitamin A than spinach, more vitamin C than tomatoes, high in potassium, high in calcium, high in iron. It's high in things we don't even know are good for us, like flavonoids and triterpenes and sesquiterpenes and phenolic acids, things that Larry knows about that probably the rest of us don't, and Gailey. Sterols, coumarins, which we talked about in the cinnamon episode. They have antibacterial properties, antioxidants, anti-inflammatories, anti-tumor. It's hepatoprotective, meaning it protects the liver. In fact, it slows the progression of liver scarring or fibrosis by inactivating the cells that cause fibrosis, which then allows your liver to heal. So many potential health benefits that have been known for a long time and backed up by modern studies. A 2015 study out of Canada found that dandelion extract blocks UVB radiation when applied to the skin, but before you go and slather it on it, it also can be a skin irritant. So it could be good for sunscreen, but not good for the skin itself. There's a 2016 study out of Denmark found that dandelion extract stimulates pancreatic cells to produce insulin to control blood sugar. There's a 2012 study out of Canada found that dandelion extract can induce apoptosis or cell death in pancreatic and prostate cancer cells that are in the lab, which could potentially prevent the spread of those killers. And this is where Chuck in the Stuff You Should Know episode pointed out that there's some pretty big irony here because we're discovering how dandelions might play a really important role in our fight against cancer, and yet we regularly spray cancer-causing chemicals on dandelions. Oops. So irony at its finest and most obvious, but it makes sense again when I talk about all of the cultures around the world that have used dandelions for thousands of years. thousands of years, and they're all in the old world because that's where dandelions originated. There is, however, strong evidence that dandelions were intentionally brought across the ocean on the Mayflower to be planted by the colonists. And then once they were established, they spread across North America faster than the humans could. And so it's interesting that the humans that were here found the dandelions first and started testing them as a medicine before they even encountered the colonists. So as the colonists spread, they found that native people, native humans, were already using dandelions. They were drinking it in tonics, they were boiling them with fatty meats, they were fermenting them and drying and roasting the root like we do with chicory as a coffee substitute. And so much evidence tells us that the humans that lived in the Americas had the botanical science down like nobody else in the world, just extremely innovative, ahead of any other culture in the opinion of many, that from agricultural science, just incredible. So now people around the world are using dandelions in so many ways, and it's easy to do because it grows everywhere. As a perennial plant, it can live more than 10 years. In the 1850s, the economical housewife printed the first known dandelion wine recipe that is still used and is very popular today. Apparently, it's very easy. It makes me want to try it. The resurgence of using dandelions, it was also a COVID activity for many. Back in 1957, Ray Bradbury, the prolific science fiction writer, published a book called Dandelion Wine, and the French still today will blanch the leaves, spread it with bread and butter. They make a salad, salade de pissenlit, I guess translates to pea in the bed salad with bacon. And dandelion greens are a regular ingredient as a salad green, bitter by itself, mixed with other greens. And this was an important source of food, especially during the Depression in the United States, because it's not hard to find dandelions growing somewhere, and they are very good for you. And there's another kind of crazy story. If you pull a dandelion at the stem, you'll probably notice there's that milky substance, that milky kind of latex substance in the stem. And in World War II, there was a natural rubber shortage because the rubber was controlled entirely by the Japanese at the time, and the other side, the Allies, needed rubber for the war effort. So they started testing all kinds of plants to see if there was something else that could be used to make rubber. The Soviets had apparently found a solution in dandelions, and so the latex from dandelions can be used to make rubber. And so the Soviets sent a bunch of seeds of a specific type of dandelion, the Kazakh dandelion, or also known as the Russian dandelion, mainly to the US and Britain in particular. And it became part of the war effort at home to plant dandelions for their rubber, and also to do the research on it. But the story goes that the Russians kind of oversold the actual production value of the dandelion, and that the yield turned out not to be viable enough to compete with other sources of rubber, particularly rubber trees. And then eventually we found out how to make synthetic rubber, which then kind of dominated the industry. But still today, natural rubber is preferred for many of its qualities, including its grip and the way it can dissipate heat better. So people are still experimenting with dandelions as a source of rubber. There is still a lot of interest in growing dandelions, not just for rubber, but for food, herbs, medicine, medicinal research. And if you think about it, like, what a sustainable crop, right? You don't have to cut down trees. They'll grow just about anywhere. They don't need chemicals. They'll grow in the worst soil in the world, pretty much. They're fine with that. Sometimes you don't even need soil. You can grow them hydroponically in water. You can grow them aeroponically in the air, or you could just grow them in your sidewalk, or as a pot herb in your kitchen. So story after story after story throughout history celebrates the virtues of dandelions, but still today, I and many of you may also hear from our wonderful neighbors that I do love that will still curse the dandelions that invade their yard or my yard. So to many, it's not a miracle, a wonder, it's a weed that people don't want. So at some point in history, this plant went from a celebrated, wonderful, useful plant to the scourge of our backyards. And there is an episode on Backyard Naturalist about grass, about turf grass, and so you can revisit that episode for a more detailed history. But just the quick history is starting in the 1600s in Britain. British aristocracy, in particular, it became very popular to have a well manicured lawn made out of turf grass for playing croquet. So the manicured lawn started to become a status symbol, and that spread to the New World, and particularly in post World War II era, and golf had some certainly a lot to do with this. This perfect lawn became a symbol of suburbia with the picket fence. In 1957, golf was televised for the first time, the Augusta National, and so everybody saw what a beautifully manicured grass lawn could look like. It could look like. Everyone wanted it, and during the Cold War, this conformity meant safety. I mean, you're one of us. You're not a communist, and you know what's the if you looking at it from this view, then what is the number one threat to a beautifully manicured lawn? It's a weed, and the number one weed enemy is the dandelion. So if you let dandelions grow in your yard, you stick out like a sore thumb. You stuck out like a sore thumb. People let you know it. Still to this day, that happens. Maybe that's a good test of your neighborhood is to let dandelions grow in your yard and see how the neighbors react. Um, but if you look at it from an ecological perspective, it's as a botanist, we will group plants into a few categories. We talked about quite a bit here. So you have native plants, you have non-native plants, you have weedy species or aggressive species, and then non-weedy species. So on the upper left, you have garlic mustard, and here in Wisconsin, this is a non-native, aggressive, weedy species. We're trying to get rid of it. It's bad for wildlife. It spreads easily. It takes over. So that's a non-native, aggressive, weedy species. On the upper right, you have another non-native species, but as the petunias it's not, they're fairly benign. You can plant them, they're not going to escape and take over the natural areas. They'll kind of do what you tell them to, easy to control. And so that becomes less of an ecological issue. And particularly when you think of plants as being able to escape, like you think of feral pigs, but there's also feral plants that can jump from your yard, get out the fence, you leave it open, and all of a sudden they're in the natural areas next door taking over and wreaking havoc. So then the bottom two species are native species that illustrate the aggressive and non-aggressive. So on the bottom left, you have zigzag goldenrod, which I love, but if you plant it, you have to prepare that it will spread quickly. And my neighbor, who is a, a natural landscaper, does complain about this natural one a little bit because he doesn't complain about my dandelions. Well, actually, he does about those too. But I love you, John. Anyway, so the zigzag goldenrod is aggressive, but it's a native and it's really important to wildlife. And then on the one on the lower right, the foam flower is pretty much going to stay where you plant it. Beautiful, native, a lot of wildlife value, and not aggressive. So you have non-native, aggressive, non-native, non-aggressive, native, aggressive, and native non-aggressive plants. A little box there. So then where would you put the dandelion? It's non-native. That one is straightforward. But is it aggressive or is it not aggressive? And that is contextual. So if you go to a naturalized forest in a healthy plant community, a dandelion might shoot up. It might live for 10 years, but it's very likely not going to be aggressive. You don't see them taking over healthy lands or forest lands or healthy prairies or savannas. And so if you're in the invasive plant fighting business, you're not worried about the dandelions taking over natural habitats the way you might, see buckthorn or buckthorn taking a forest or teasel taking over a prairie. So in this context, you would call dandelions non-native and non-aggressive. But if you switch the canvas to a manicured lawn, then all of a sudden, heck yeah, this becomes an invasive weed that's impossible to get rid of. So they're really good at taking over these monoculture lawns and spreading quickly. And so it really depends on what you want. This is a really aggressive for a lawn, not aggressive at all in natural areas. So really hard to get rid of if they do take over. And then they have characteristics of some of the other aggressive species we don't want. So if you pull it, you have to get the whole thing up, including that taproot. If you just leave a small section of that taproot behind, you haven't gotten rid of it. And that taproot can grow very deep. Normally it's about a foot, but it can grow, from what I understand, feet, plural. And that is important for another reason. So it makes it hard to get rid of, but as a kind of member of the plant community, it's actually good. We've already know that it releases ethylene, but if you think about your turf grass, the roots are so shallow. That's why you have to fertilize them. They just can't get the nutrients. And then you have this dandelion that's going way down to in the soil and bringing up nutrients to the surface. And then, it ends up sharing those nutrients with other plants. So it, in a in a kind of twist on the story, the dandelions are actually good for your grass, but we as a culture still tend to dislike it, maybe even hate it. In 2005, residential US lawns made up 2% of the land. That's a big section of land, but 2%. And our lawns require more irrigation than any single domestic agricultural crop. And according to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, homeowners use 10 times more pesticides per acre than farmers. And so while we're spreading all these chemicals into the environment, we're also spraying our bushes, spraying the gardens with chemicals because we want to kill all those pesky bugs. And according to a 2019 study, the mass of insects around the globe is falling at about 2.5% per year, and we need those insects, but we're trained to get rid of them. So important for all of our communities. And the dandelions are good for the insects. They're not native, but they're here for our pollinators, for our birds, for our moths, for our butterflies, bees, and for the other plants. Um, so we are seeing a return to more of an acceptance, not just of dandelions, but of natural lawns in general, which we've talked about quite a bit on this program. And it's just so much better for everything. And so we had a program on No Mow May, which encourages you to leave your dandelions in your lawn to be that early food for the insects that need it. Minnesota started a program called Lawns to Legumes that gives homeowners a rebate for transferring their lawns. So we are returning to, our early human roots and bringing things like dandelions back in favor. They're nutritious. They have powerful medicinal properties. They're delicate. I'm not sure why as a kid we associated them with babies' heads popping off. I don't know where that one came from. They can predict if you're in love. They can predict if you like butter. And what other plant can do all this and still grant you wishes? So this is the dandelion, and I thank you for joining me this morning. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and I will stop sharing my screen because it's 10 o'clock.